July 2026, New Delhi. Thousands of young Indians pour onto the streets carrying placards, waving the national flag, and chanting slogans demanding accountability from the government. Their destination? The Parliament of India. Police barricades stretch across the roads. Security personnel stand in full riot gear. Tear gas shells are fired. Baton charges follow. Within hours, images of injured students and chaotic clashes dominate television screens and social media. But perhaps the most surprising part of this story isn't the protest itself. It is the organization leading it. A movement calling itself the Cockroach Janta Party, a name that sounds more like an internet joke than a political movement. Yet within just a few weeks, this group has mobilized thousands of students, attracted nationwide attention, gained support from prominent public figures, and sparked one of the most significant youth-led protests India has seen in recent years. So who are they? Why would anyone proudly call themselves cockroaches? And how did a viral internet movement end up challenging the government on the streets of the nation's capital? This is the story of the Cockroach Janta Party. To understand this movement, we have to go back several months. Every year, millions of Indian students prepare for highly competitive entrance examinations such as NEET and other national tests. For many families, these exams are more than academic milestones. They represent years of hard work and the hope of a better future. But in 2026, that confidence was shaken. Reports of examination irregularities, including alleged paper leaks and concerns over the administration and evaluation of major exams, triggered widespread frustration among students. Many felt that even after years of preparation, their future could be affected by failures beyond their control. The protest also drew attention to student stress and mental health, with demonstrators demanding greater accountability and systematic reforms. For thousands of young people, the issue was no longer about one examination. It was about trust. Trust in the institutions responsible for deciding their future. And once that trust began to crack, social media became the place where that frustration exploded. Now comes the question almost everyone asked: why cockroach? The answer is surprisingly symbolic. The movement adopted the cockroach as its symbol after a derogatory remark comparing young protesters to cockroaches gained widespread attention. Instead of rejecting the label, supporters embraced it. Their message was simple: you can step on a cockroach, you can try to crush it, but it survives. It comes back again and again. For supporters, the insect became a metaphor for resilience, a way of saying that ordinary citizens, especially students, could not simply be silenced or ignored. What began as satire quickly transformed into a recognizable political identity across social media. Memes soon turned into slogans. Slogans became campaigns. Campaigns became a movement. And within weeks, millions of young Indians were following pages carrying the cockroach symbol. At the center of this movement was a relatively unknown man, Abhijeet Dipke, an Indian based in the United States. Dipke had built a significant online following by discussing public policy, governance, and youth issues. As frustration over examination controversies grew, he began urging students to organize peacefully and demand accountability rather than limit themselves to online outrage. Instead of announcing a traditional political party with elections, candidates, or manifestos, he described the Cockroach Janta Party as a people's movement. Its central demand was clear: the resignation of Union Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan, and comprehensive reforms to the examination system. Whether people agreed with those demands or not, one thing became undeniable. The movement was growing fast. History has shown us that many modern movements begin online. The Arab Spring, Hong Kong, farmers' campaigns, climate protest, and now India witnessed another example of social media translating into physical demonstrations. Using Instagram live sessions, short form videos, and online communities, organizers encouraged supporters to gather peacefully in Delhi. The chosen venue was Jantar Mantar. For decades, Jantar Mantar has served as one of India's most recognized locations for public demonstrations because authorities designate it as a place where citizens can assemble and express dissent. That history made it the natural starting point for this movement as well. When the first major protest took place in early June, hundreds arrived. Many observers expected the movement to fade within days. Instead, it grew. Students came not only from Delhi but also from neighboring states. Parents joined. Working professionals began visiting after office hours. People carried books, the Constitution of India, and portraits of freedom fighters alongside the national flag. Organizers repeatedly appealed for peaceful demonstrations, emphasizing constitutional methods of protest. The movement was no longer confined to social media. It had entered the streets. Then came another turning point. Education reform advocate and environmental activist Sonam Wangchuk joined the demonstrations. His participation significantly increased national attention. Soon afterward, Wangchuk began an indefinite hunger strike to press for educational reforms and accountability, adding moral weight to the movement's demands. Protest organizers argued that the issue was larger than a single minister or a single examination. It was about rebuilding confidence in the education system itself. As days passed, Jantar Mantar evolved into more than a protest site. It became a symbol. People camped there. Volunteers distributed food and water. Medical teams assisted participants. Lawyers, teachers, and former students visited to express solidarity. National media and international outlets also began covering the story as the demonstrations continued. But while the crowds grew larger, another question emerged. Would the government negotiate, or would it try to prevent the movement from going further? That answer would arrive with the announcement of the most ambitious step yet, a march toward parliament, and that decision would change everything. As the days passed, the protesters felt they had made their point. The crowds at Jantar Mantar were growing. The issue had dominated television debates. Social media was flooded with videos from the protest site. Yet, according to the organizers, their core demands had still not been accepted. That was when the movement announced its boldest decision yet. Sansad Chalo, March to Parliament. The idea was simple. If those in power were not coming to listen to the students, then the students would peacefully take their voices to the doorstep of Parliament. Organizers urged participants to remain non-violent, carry the national flag, avoid damaging public property, and follow constitutional methods of protest. But everyone knew this march would be very different from the demonstrations at Jantar Mantar. Unlike a designated protest site, the Parliament complex is among the most heavily secured areas in India. Delhi police made it clear that protesters would not be allowed to proceed into restricted zones, and additional barricades and personnel were deployed across central Delhi. The stage was now set for confrontation, not necessarily because either side wanted violence, but because both sides were determined not to back down. On the morning of the march, thousands of protesters began gathering. Students, teachers, parents, working professionals, Many carried copies of the Constitution. Others held placards demanding transparency and accountability in the examination system. As the crowd moved forward, police repeatedly appealed for demonstrators to stop at designated points. When section of the crowd continued advancing, security forces blocked the route using barricades. Soon, pushing and shoving began. Videos from the scene showed confusion, protesters trying to move forward and police attempting to hold the line. According to protesters and several opposition leaders, police used batons and tear gas against demonstrators. Delhi police, however, stated that officers acted only after restrictions were violated and that the measures were necessary to maintain law and order around parliament. As often happens during large protests, competing narratives emerged almost immediately. Within hours, images of injured protesters spread across television channels and social media, turning what had begun as a student march into a national political issue. Sometimes a single day changes the course of an entire movement. For the Cockroach Janta Party, this was that day. Until now, this had largely been viewed as a youth-led protest. But after the clashes, India's opposition parties began responding more aggressively. The Congress party accused the government of suppressing peaceful democratic protest. Rahul Gandhi expressed solidarity with the students and argued that young people deserve to be heard rather than confronted. Other opposition parties also voiced support, saying the issue went beyond one examination and reflected wider concerns about transparency and accountability. For the opposition, this became an opportunity to question the government's handling of education and dissent. For the protesters, political support brought both advantages and challenges. On one hand, it amplified their message. On the other, critics argued that the movement risked becoming politically polarized. Organizers insisted that their demands remained focused on education reforms and accountability, regardless of which political parties choose to support them. That distinction became one of the defining debates surrounding the movement. Was it still an independent student movement, or was it evolving into a broader political campaign? The answer depended on whom you asked. As pressure mounted, the government defended its position. Officials said that examination reforms were already underway and that steps had been taken to strengthen the integrity of national testing systems. The government rejected opposition claims that it had ignored students. It also argued that the protests were increasingly being politicized and that parliament and high security areas could not be allowed to function under pressure from unauthorized demonstrations. Delhi police similarly maintained that their actions were guided by security requirements rather than political considerations. Meanwhile, protest organizers argued that assurances alone were not enough. They wanted visible accountability, institutional reforms, and action that could restore public confidence in the examination system. This is where the debate moved beyond one protest. It became a larger discussion about governance. How should a democracy respond when young citizens lose confidence in public institutions? How should governments balance the constitutional right to protest with the responsibility to maintain public order? These are difficult questions, and there are no easy answers. Regardless of political opinion, one fact is difficult to ignore. The Cockroach Janta Party has demonstrated the extraordinary power of digital mobilization. What began as an online symbol adopted by frustrated students transformed into a nationwide movement capable of drawing thousands onto the streets and forcing one of the country's biggest political conversations. It also showed how quickly social media can convert frustration into organization. In earlier decades, building a national movement required years. Today, a smartphone, a compelling narrative, and a shared grievance can unite people across states within weeks. Whether this movement ultimately achieves its stated demands remains uncertain. History reminds us that not every protest produces immediate policy change, but history also shows that many reforms begin with citizens refusing to remain silent. So, what happens next? Will the protests continue? Will negotiations replace confrontation? Will the government introduce further reforms that satisfy students? Or will this become another chapter in India's long history of public movements that reshaped political debate? Only time will answer those questions. But one thing is already clear. Few could have imagined that a symbol as ordinary as a cockroach would become the face of one of the India's most talked about youth movements. Whether people see it as a courageous citizens campaign, an emerging political force, or a movement whose methods and goals deserve scrutiny, the Cockroach Janta Party has succeeded in doing one undeniable thing. It has forced the nation to pay attention, and perhaps that is the biggest lesson of this story. In a democracy, movements rise and fall, governments change, oppositions evolve. But when young people believe that their future is at stake, their voices rarely remain confined to classrooms or social media for long. The real question is no longer whether India has noticed this movement. The question is whether everyone involved, protesters, opposition leaders, and the government can now turn confrontation into constructive reform. Because in the end, the future being debated on the streets is the future that millions of young Indians will eventually inherit. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to @ManishSirG. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, but keep the discussion respectful and fact-based. Thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next video.